James Maddison is out for the season, ladies and gentlemen. News that we probably all expected: an anterior cruciate ligament damaged knee, and the scan comes back with the worst possible news. It won't be short term. He's out for the foreseeable, and it leaves Tottenham in a particularly awkward position because the rest of the market will now know and will adjust accordingly. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about what options Tottenham Hotspur have, and we will also be talking about other transfer news, views, and clues relating to Tyler Dibbling, to Jack Grealish, Rodrigo, and Eberechi Eze, alongside some insights from Kevin Danzo and Brennan Johnson around how it is working under Thomas Frank, as we are only hours away from the final pre-season friendly against Bayern Munich this afternoon in Germany. A stream that will be available right here, not the actual stream of the game, but the watch-along version of it from myself. I am Sean Butler. I hope you are all happy and healthy, doing the things that you love, guys, with those you love to do them with. Please strap yourselves in. Do the honor, if you are so kind, as to hit the like button for me. I really do appreciate all of the support you show the channel every single day. Hit the subscribe if you haven't already. We're on the march to 37k, then 40k is the big one, and then after that, we'll see where we can take the bad boy, but it's all down to you guys, and I'm so grateful for all the support. Hit the notification bell as well, and drop your comments. Let me know your thoughts on today's topics. We are, of course, going to start, guys, with this James Maddison story. As I say, it's devastating for the player. It's devastating for Thomas Frank and Tottenham's plans, and it might be devastating for our ability to have leverage in any transfer negotiations that probably are taking place, although we're not particularly aware of too many, at least ones that we can know for sure, as there's lots of mixed messages out there in the world of ITK and journalism with regards who Tottenham are looking at for that forward line entity. No defensive links today. Finally, we've got a day without a defensive link. As I said to you guys a few times now, it really isn't as huge a priority, in my opinion, of course, as some of the journalists are suggesting that the club feel it is. But look, we haven't got a bottomless pit of money, and what we do have needs to be put into certain areas, and certain areas very, very quickly. Let's start with the story. This is from the BBC Sport. Sammy Motbell says Tottenham midfielder James Maddison has suffered an anterior cruciate ligament injury and is expected to miss the majority of the forthcoming season. Sources have told BBC Sport that Maddison is set to have surgery and will become a long-term absentee as he starts his recovery programme. The 28-year-old suffered the injury in the pre-season draw against Newcastle in South Korea last weekend. Manager Thomas Frank confirmed after the match that Maddison had injured the same knee that ruled him out of the Europa League final victory against United in May. Since returning from Asia on Monday, Maddison has undergone tests in recent days to ascertain the severity of the injury. Initial fears were that Maddison had suffered a cruciate ligament injury, and those concerns have now been realised. Terrible start to your Thursday, guys. Terrible start. Hopefully it can only get better. But we have to look, obviously, at what we're going to do instead. Now, a lot of the news out has been around Tottenham's pursuit of potentially a left winger in the guise of Rodrigo. Now, I'm quickly going to pivot across to this story that's come out from Graham Bailey again this morning. He says, this is from Billy Myers, sorry. It was retweeted by Graham Bailey. He says, the reason Arsenal and Tottenham haven't made a move for Rodrigo yet, which is interesting because I'm pretty sure that TBR just last week was saying that we had, and they were using the Fajia's article, and also they were then referencing off of Marca and AS and all the teams, all the other reporters that are overseas that have said that there has definitely been some contact. Of course, Ben Jacobs said the other day that that wasn't true. There has been no contact, and that Rodrigo hasn't put in a transfer request. Anyway, TBR Football have been exclusively informed that Arsenal and Tottenham are waiting for a signal from Rodrigo before making a move for the Real Madrid forward. The Brazilian international seems surplus to requirements under Xavi, who only handed the South American 92 minutes of action at the FIFA Club World Cup earlier this summer. Graham Bailey, chief correspondent at TBR Football, can now share details on why Arsenal and Tottenham are yet to make an official bid for Rodrigo. He says, we understand Arsenal and Tottenham are waiting for the Brazilian to signal a desire to leave the Santiago Bernabeu for England before making offers. Arsenal are able to afford a deal for Rodrigo, who Real Madrid wants £70 million for, despite already spending over £190 million on new recruits. Tottenham can also finance a deal after Heung Min's son moved to LAFC. Bailey said, Rodrigo is still very much on the radar. It's natural when a player of that caliber comes up. Arsenal and Tottenham just want to make sure it's what Rodrigo wants, and that they're not going to be used to make bids, and then the player says no. They're smarter than that. I think the next week or so will be hugely telling for Rodrigo. The story goes on. Liverpool also monitoring Rodrigo as well. And look, Arsenal haven't had a fantastic pre-season at all. I was watching some of their fan channels yesterday regarding their loss to Villarreal, I think it was. A lot of them were saying that a lot of these new players that are coming in, there's no spark or creativity from them. It's actually the people that have already been at the club that were bringing the heat in the game yesterday, the kind of relatively few positives. And so there probably might be an argument that they need to go again, especially if Leandro Trossard does end up going to Brentford, or possibly Martinelli going across to, into Europe somewhere. Maybe not Bayern Munich anymore, seeing as Bayern Munich have just got their guy Luis Diaz. Anyway, the sort of the narrative here is that Arsenal and Tottenham are looking to know whether there's any point in making a bid. And this is one of the points that I've been making to guys on my channel, to people that were on the fan show last night. If you haven't seen it, please check it out. That, there's the kind of the consequences of keeping your cards close to your chest, which is something that Johan Lang obviously includes in his strategy, leaves fans wondering what's going on. Are we doing anything? The fact that there's no noise suggests that there's no activity, and that's not the case because, for the most part, most of Johan Lang's transfers, whatever noise does exist out there are not on players that we're actually going for, and then all of a sudden, nothing. We hear about a player and then we're in talks and it's done within minutes or hours. We saw that with Odegaard. We saw it with Palhinha to some degree. I think most of the noise was from the Tottenham fan base saying you have to go after it. There wasn't really that much in the way of Tottenham are interested in Palhinha until it was very close to being done. And certainly that was the case for Mohamed Kudus and for Morgan Gibbs-White. And so you could make the argument that every single story that's out there right now, if it's being led by journalists, is probably a red herring, because sometimes it's Tottenham fans that are asking for stories and pushing stories out there, and they might materialize. But ultimately, if it's coming from if it's journalist fed information, then given Johan Lang's sort of nature, it's probably not worth sort of talking about. And we'll get something else that will come along. But the idea that nothing is going on at all in the background is incredibly naive. Of course it is. The Kudus deal and the Gibbs-White deal that almost happened, none of those things would have been like very short-term transactions. Those conversations would have been happening. The preparation for those deals would have been happening for months in advance. I would imagine that Tottenham were probably aware of Morgan Gibbs-White's situation with that release clause months ago, knew when it was that they could activate, and then were just silly about the way they went about it and made it too obvious, and consequently everything that fell out happened. So, as I say, I think that the alternative to that strategy is to do what Newcastle United have done, which is basically air their dirty laundry in public, let the world know every player that they've gone after, and then allow other teams to come in, to gazump them, to hijack, and then the rejection happens. And then ultimately you've got Newcastle United that are now kind of down at their 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th choice for certain positions. And there is a consequence to that. As I said to you on last night's video, I think that two things will materialize. One is the player that's on that list, number 10, will sit there and think, well, why would I go there when 9 people before me have rejected you? What's going on? And the other thought process, if not both of them that would be happening at the same time, would be, you don't want me. You wanted the 9 guys before me. So why would I want to come to you? And it makes it very difficult to be sincere in your approach to a player, saying, we're going to build the team around you. You're a massive part of our plans. We've loved you for a long time. If you've had that same conversation with 9 previous attempts and they've all turned you down, it makes it very difficult. And there's obviously a happy medium, but those two polarizing strategies, if they both ultimately end up with the same outcome, which is no one coming in, then either the fan base get frustrated with the idea that nothing's happening, or the fan base get frustrated with the idea of, why can't we ever get a guy over the line? Sometimes that can appear like ambition. Other times it could be sort of twisted into the notion of delusions of grandeur. And I think that, for me, if Tottenham Hotspur and Arsenal, according to this Graham Bailey report, are both looking or waiting for a signal, then it's another demonstration that they don't want to be the person who puts their head above the parapet, that puts a bid out there and is either then used to create a bidding war or ultimately comes back with mud on their face for having the audacity to go after a player of that level just to be rejected and look silly in the process. Because there is some reputational damage that will be applicable to teams that go after players that are above their pecking order and that ultimately don't come home with the goods. And so I can understand it, but as a fan, I understand that the silence with regards to too many new names is frustrating, and it leaves you wondering what's going on, if anything at all. I'm absolutely certain that things are going on, but obviously can't prove that until the proof will be in the pudding. Let's move on to this story about Alejandro Garnacho. This is essentially, the article here is again from Graham Bailey. It's been referenced. Is saying that Garnacho is refusing to rule out joining Tottenham. Speaking to TBR Football, Bailey reports that Frank's side and Aston Villa are other suitors than just Chelsea for Garnacho, and that Garnacho hasn't discounted joining either of them over Chelsea, even if Stamford Bridge is his preferred destination right now. Garnacho, this is what Graham Bailey said, Garnacho is determined to leave Old Trafford. We know that. And Chelsea appeal, but I am told he has not discounted other options. A move to Stamford Bridge does stand out to him. Spurs and Villa like him, but Chelsea have done a lot of work so far. It's interesting because going to Chelsea, he'll have to compete with, 2 or 3 other players in that position, and many of them will have been signed this summer. So, it's interesting to know where you sit in the pecking order if you're joining a club to play in the same position as a player like Jamie Gittins, who is just as young and has cost more money. And so could you make the argument there, therefore, that the club would see that particular player as a pecking order? Or maybe it's just a revolving door and say, listen, come here, have a go, have a crack. If you're good enough, you'll stay. If not, we can move you on, and look, we'll sign you to a long contract and pay you handsomely whilst you're here in the process. And Chelsea don't have any problem moving players on. And having played for Chelsea on your resume, it's going to be something that makes your resume pop and stand out. So there is a kind of logic to the thought process, especially if you treat your players like tradable assets rather than the way that I think that a lot of other clubs, maybe Tottenham as well, do, which is to think of their players more as part of the furniture after a while. It's a different way of doing things. I'm not sure necessarily which way is the best way, but time will tell with Chelsea. Time will tell. Let's move on, guys, to this story here. Paratici is pivotal and masterminds the Tottenham exit of a club player, Bryan Gil. It was uncertain whether the Italian side, this is Bologna, by the way, Corriere dello Sport reported that Tottenham's Bryan Gil has been offered to Bologna by the player's entourage. It was uncertain whether the Italian side had any interest in the winger, but were ready to evaluate his profile. Today's Corriere dello Sport carries some promising detail. They report that Bologna sporting director Giovanni Sartori wants to explore the situation further, with Gil described as a player of infinite quality. Well, I mean, some Tottenham fans would probably agree. Other Tottenham fans possibly wouldn't. The idea that took root when Sartori sat beside ex-Tottenham sporting director Fabio Paratici during a friendly against Como some days ago, and Gil was inserted into the conversation. The newspaper claimed that this didn't happen by chance. It is presumed that even if Paratici isn't officially employed by Tottenham, that he's helping them with moves this summer, and that is why he informed Sartori about Gil's situation. It's really interesting, guys, because Bryan Gil, as far as I was aware, was on loan at Girona with an obligation pending certain outcomes. I think it was an option initially, but pending certain performance metrics, it was an obligation for, was it 12 million euros, 15 million euros, 12 million pounds, something like that. He obviously got injured. I asked this to you months ago. What is the point of having obligations in contracts if you could just go back to the table and negotiate them down? If the contractual stipulations have been met, and yet Girona don't seem to want, just because he's injured now. I mean, maybe there was a get out of jail in the case of an injury or something like that. But either way, this player, for what it's worth, I believe this is true, is statistically the second longest serving Tottenham player in our squad, in our first team squad, behind Ben Davies following Sonny's departure. I mean, it's quite remarkable, isn't it? He's the second most senior player in terms of tenure at Tottenham, even though he spent most of his time overseas abroad on loan. Quite wild. I'd forgotten he was a part of the furniture, but I guess he is maybe a bit of furniture on loan. Either way, yeah, no clearer, but Bologna is the latest name to be mentioned with him. Let's move on again, guys, to this story Sport Witness are bringing this to our attention today, but it's coming from Turkish media. Takvim. Again, I spoke to you before about the problems trusting Turkish media. My problems in the past regarding Altay Bayindir and Nelson from Victor Nelson, I think it was from Galatasaray and Besiktas, respectively. Those two players were told that they had joined Tottenham Hotspur. They never obviously materialised. And Turkish media today are saying that Tottenham are again showing interest in Galatasaray forward Barış Alper Yilmaz. I think I did a video on Yilmaz maybe a week, 10 days ago. And in it, I run him through the Y-Scout tool, and he comes across as a very physical winger. Very, very strong. He seems to bounce off players, good in close control, decent output, and a tricky player, very tricky player. But there's something about him that looks a little bit sluggish. He's not overweight, but he looks like he's always running at sort of half pace. Even when he has space behind, he could dribble a lot faster. I just don't think that that the athleticism in him is going to suit the faster pace of Premier League football. And whilst he is a very talented player, not for me. But I've only run him through the Y-Scout for half an hour to come to that conclusion. So let me know if you disagree, if you're more familiar. It does say, it's claimed that Yilmaz's agent held a meeting with Galatasaray hierarchy and informed them of Spurs' plans to make an offer. According to the Turkish media outlet, it would take a bid of at least 35 million euros to sign the 25-year-old after he recently extended his Gala contract into 2028. So Nottingham Forest were interested in him last week. I remember Everton as well took a look at him. And I think a couple of the other sort of mid-table teams did as well. So West Ham, it says it here even, sorry. West Ham as well have shown interest. There's also reports that Inter Milan are monitoring the situation. For me, look, if you're trying to find a winger that can create goals, and I think this is part of the recipe of what we're looking for now, that is that you do have to figure out how do you replace the 67 GA that Tottenham Hotspur have lost over the last sort of few months with regards Sonny leaving the club and, of course, now Maddison's long-term injury. So whilst I think that there is a lot of merit, and Decky as well, whilst there is a lot of merit to that notion of if we're going to find an attacking player, and you know what, strikers these days don't really bang in 20 goals a season that much anymore. I think last season there was 3 or 4 players that scored 20 goals in the Premier League. Very few. Back in the day, there used to be, maybe 15, 16 players that would do that. Almost what every team had or most teams in the top half of the table had a 20-goal-a-season guy. It doesn't happen that much anymore because of the formational pivots towards 4-3-3s, and you have more wider men rather than two front men. You have situations where there's more creativity, more distribution of the output. And I think Tottenham have to be wary of that 67-goal GA deficit that we have to make up. And so we need to go and get wingers that can contribute. This is one of the reasons why the Jack Grealish thing is quite controversial in some people's minds. A wonderful player when he's at his best, fantastic at drawing fouls, which shouldn't be overlooked because it looks like Tottenham Hotspur are moving into a sort of slightly bigger, more stockier, average squad size. Certainly, we've been spending a lot of time in the last few weeks of pre-season focusing on discipline from set pieces, both offensively and defensively. And those sorts of things are going to yield fruit. But corner kicks can't be the only really attacking option when it comes to those sorts of outlays. If that's the effort to try to get an extra 15 goals in the season from things like set pieces, then you can use corner kicks for that advantage. But you can also use free kicks in and around the box. And Jack Grealish is brilliant at doing that. So there's absolute value there, similar to how James Maddison used to draw fouls as well. But obviously, Jack Grealish doesn't provide you with the output. He doesn't score very many goals, and he hasn't created that many assists either over the last couple of years. So I'm not saying that it's a complete whitewash, but I think that there has to be that stuff considered and baked into whatever opinion you land on with Jack Grealish. And I think both opinions, yes, you'd like him, or no, you wouldn't. On a loan deal, I think it's something that you can figure out over a year if there was interest. And apparently Tottenham Hotspur are making a move again. Everton are already involved, and there's stories out this afternoon or this morning rather saying that Everton are now concerned that teams like Tottenham Hotspur and Newcastle have stepped up their interest. It got to the point where Ornstein mentioned the Everton deal for Jack Grealish, and Ornstein doesn't talk until it's close. But this morning, it's not as close as it probably was yesterday, or people thought it was, because apparently Tottenham and Newcastle were paying attention and thinking that maybe that was a deal that everyone thought would happen at the end of the window. Maybe it's getting front run because David Moyes is looking for a replacement. And maybe in order to raise money, David Moyes is bringing him on a loan deal and then maybe looking at selling, according to those reports, Udogie out to Inter Milan. They offered him to, apparently, who's a really cracking player and a player I'd love to see. And maybe Everton are trying to raise money by selling one great player and loaning somebody else in, just as a way to keep the receipts turning over. It will be an interesting story what happens to that and die. The issue is, though, for Tottenham, not when we're looking for wide men, not just about how do you replace that 67 GA, but the benefit to me, I've been talking about this forever, is having that two take-on specialists on both sides, a Kudus on the right wing, a Garnacho on the left, or someone like him, a Malik Fofana from Lyon, somebody that can take a player on, can beat a man, and is equally comfortable going inside or out as Kudus is on the right-hand side, where you can draw fouls, you can cross the ball in if you're good at that sort of thing, and also you can come in and cut in and shoot and link up the play. Someone like an Ademola Lookman would be a great option for that. The value in having those two threats is that when you have a monster in the 6 or the 8 who is a brilliant player at recovering the ball in transition and then retransitioning into the channels, by having those two men that are out wide waiting to go on the shoulder, then you have a situation whereby those fullbacks, if they're terrified of being taken on a one-on-one basis, they can ask for support from either the 6 or from their centre-backs to come out and try to nullify that take-on threat. That creates space in the middle, which you can then utilise by playing it into a creative playmaker. Somebody like a Decky, a Maddison, or a Morgan Gibbs-White, or insert anyone else that we maybe were thinking about having, but now we don't have any. And so the value of going after a winger like a Rodrigo, the value of going after a winger like a Lookman to complement our left and right side balance to replace the value that Sonny used to have, it really does compound on itself if you have the 10 in the middle who would then have the space in that environment in which I just espoused. If you don't have a 10, then it's very easy to nullify the benefits of having those two take-on specialists by doubling up on them, knowing that there's nobody in the middle that's really going to make the most use and the efficiencies out of having the additional space when those fullbacks or the 6 drifts out to protect the fullback in the one-on-one situation. So if Tottenham are going to get that 7 on the left to replace Sonny, whoever that is, then that is only as valuable as it can be if you also have a 10. And the problem is that we also need a 9 to be able to put the ball in the back of the net more frequently than our current 2 do. Good news about that today is that apparently Dominic Solanke will be back in contention for the Bayern Munich game. Hopefully there's no issues there. Hopefully he can get 20 minutes, half an hour, and then he'll be ready for PSG and there'll be no more hang-ups or hiccups. But if you do think the way I think about this, then you can't really kill 2 birds without killing the third. I think you need to throw a couple of stones here. You absolutely need to have at least a 10 that can do the left winger, or ideally both. An Eberici Eze in the 10 would be spectacular. And then after that, you can drift him out onto the left-hand side if need be, or you can use an Odebear out there until someone like Decky gets back to full fitness. But in any event, for me, the complete solution of how I envision Tottenham's new attack, it really does need the creative spark in the 10 and that take-on specialist. And then after that, you also need somebody that can put the ball in the back of the net more frequently than Solanke or Richarlison currently do. And so that's going to cost a lot of money. And I really hope that, given Daniel Levy's speech and Vinay's co-signing it, saying that our ambitions are to win the Premier League and to win the Champions League at some point, to the fact that they have doubled down on that risk appetite by loaning out so many of our younger guys, including Vuskovic, who looks more and more likely to go to Germany by the day. Still a decision I don't understand the logic behind when you really break it down. Well, at that point, you start to think, well, Daniel Levy really better know what he's doing here. But unfortunately, because of Maddison's news today that he's out for the rest of the season, in all likelihood, that's going to add 10, 15, 20% to the cost of any of the players that we're looking for in that crucial position, because all those teams are going to know that Tottenham are desperate. It's the equivalent of needing a plumber to come out at 9 a.m. or needing a plumber to come out at 2 a.m. You're going to pay a lot more because needs must and because it's an emergency. So it'll be interesting to see how we handle that. Just quickly on the other sort of news coming out there regarding players in and around the Tottenham or the footballing world that have had commentary that we can look at. Just real quick, guys, to round off. You've got Jermaine Defoe that is saying, without a shadow of a doubt, that he thinks that Eze should be the guy. He said, Defoe told TalkSport, Eze is someone who, if this makes sense, is a Tottenham player, someone who plays with freedom. And you look at the great players over the years that the players have had, technically how good he is and how confident he is, and another special footballer. If that can happen, then it'll be only good for the team, because when you get the injuries, you need to replace these players. As I said yesterday, Eberechi Eze apparently is wanted by Tottenham and Arsenal and a bunch of other teams, but everybody seems to think that his value is closer to 50 to 60, not the 68 that Crystal Palace want. If that's the case, fair enough. But Tottenham Hotspur have got a needs-must situation. And if everybody else doesn't think he's worth 68, and that's the number that Crystal Palace want, I think you have to just go and get it done. The clause expiration is approaching. And after that, Crystal Palace won't be in any mood to deal at that level, knowing what Tottenham are at. So I really hope that in the next 24, 36, 48 hours, that Tottenham Hotspur phone up Crystal Palace and make this one sweet enough so that you don't have any problems. Give them 70 million. Recognize that sometimes you can be penny wise and pound foolish, and trying to nickel and dime delays the activity. It creates nasty, bad relationships. It creates a reluctance for the deal to happen. Pick the phone up, give Palace what they want. Nurture that relationship, by the way, because there might be players that we want to go back to next summer, like an Adam Wharton, or potentially a Mark Gahey in January, or potentially a Mateta. There's loads and loads of players that Tottenham might be looking at Crystal Palace in the future, and it would be nice to be able to have a relationship that is convivial and conducive to good business outcomes. So this one, for me, it's so obvious, it's so necessary, that right now, given that Maddison news, Tottenham Hotspur shouldn't be messing around here, because he would be a unifier of the fan base as well. Last story for you guys is the story that Tottenham Hotspur and Newcastle United have joined the Tyler Dibbling hunt. It looked like the 19-year-old's future lay in Merseyside, with Ben Jacobs revealing that there was an optimism between Everton and Southampton that a deal could be completed. The Toffee saw a bid of £27 million for Dibbling rejected. The other day, I told you that was apparently the asking price. This is how these stories move so quickly. People were saying that £27 million is all that Southampton want at the moment. Obviously, that was rejected. And now it says, with Steele's side reportedly holding out for an offer in the region of £40 million, as per Alex Crook of TalkSport. Now Everton are rumoured to face serious competition for the teenager's signature. According to Team Talk, Tottenham Hotspur and Newcastle United are now showing interest in a deal for Dibbling, with David Moyes' outfit in danger of missing out on the transfer. Spurs are believed to be following the situation closely whilst monitoring developments, whereas Newcastle are rumoured to have made early contact with the player, with talks still in a very preliminary stage. This isn't the first time the North London side have been linked with the move for Dibbling, as it was reported by Football Insider that they saw a bid rejected for the winger in January. Despite Southampton's struggles last term, the 19-year-old's quality was clear to see throughout the campaign, quickly emerging as one of the top flight's leading young talents. Look, I'll be entirely honest, I don't subscribe to this notion that other people do in the sort of Tottenham content space, that he's one to avoid. I think he's a very, very good player. I was horrified by the prospect that someone thought he was worth 100 million or 75. I think 40 million for a guy with that much sort of potential is probably the right sort of level. However, I don't think Tottenham Hotspur need any more kids that haven't proven themselves. He does look like a baller for the future, but we've got enough kids, and the more kids you bring in, all you're doing is cop blocking the future paths of players like Mikey Moore, potentially Jamie Donnelly, the Tyrese Halsley and JAs, all of these guys that play in the midfield and that can do a little bit of everything, sometimes on the wing, sometimes more centrally. If you bring in another 19-year-old, what are you saying about the potential future of our youth? And I just think that right now Tottenham need more experience. We've proven quality that can come in and that can distribute that GA current deficit a little bit more fairly. And so that's why I would love Tottenham to go and drop £70 million on an Eberechi Eze. If there's any chance at all that you could drop 50 million, £45 million on an Ademola Lookman, then you're looking at £115 million. And in that, you have killed two birds, possibly even all three, because Lookman can certainly play in an advanced role if necessary. He is Prem-proven. He has done it in the English league. His numbers have got better as he's got older. But for me, the only question marks I have is a little bit about the fact that the frequency of arguments that he has with his managers. I don't know if that's going to be too much of a kind of no D-heads policy that Thomas Frank won't like. We shall see. It also looks like that he's pretty firm on wanting to go to Inter. But Atalanta don't want to sell to Inter for whatever reason, and Arsenal now are stepping up the interest. Rodrigo comes with its own set of concerns and issues and plausibility, but if you can get someone like a Rodrigo, he's going to want to play off the left in the in that left wing spot. Does that then mean that Mathys Tel will come through and play as the 9? People in Germany have always said that he should be a 9. He's not a winger. He was only shoehorned there when Leroy Sané got injured. Guys, I've been talking far too long. Sorry for the long update, but it's important to get this stuff off your chest. I'll see you later for the live stream for the watch along. Right here on the Spurs Talk Show. If you are interested in listening to this stuff, then you can hear it on the various podcast formats, Amazon, Apple Pods, and on Spotify. You can even actually see this exactly as it is right now. And in fact, if you are on Spotify, you will have been able to have seen this a little bit earlier than you would do on YouTube. It gets uploaded there first, and then it comes onto YouTube straight afterwards. So please go over there and follow, hit the 5-star. I'll see you later on, guys. Like, subscribe, and comment. Let me know your thoughts on all of that, and I'll see you later. Take care, as always. Bye-bye.